today we are going to talk about Chapter 11, Lesson 1. So we're starting Rome. Actually, this is going to be a combination 11 and 12 test. Okay. All right, so first we'll start off with the founding of Rome. I'm sure you know Rome is in Italy, and Italy is centrally located in the Mediterranean, and so that makes it a great place, right? Because it's easy to travel to Africa and Asia and Europe, and also around there, the mountain passes are easy to pass through. So that's unlike other places we've talked about where that's kind of isolated them. These mountain slopes are not a problem. They can be passed through. And also Italy itself is a great, wonderful climate, mild, sunny, and great farmland. So of course it makes sense that it's going to be a popular place to settle. And they're going to be able to grow, an abundance of food, which can support a large population. All right, so let's talk about Rome itself. So Rome is about 15 miles up the Tiber River, up from the Mediterranean. And of course, being located on a river is going to be excellent for transportation, right? Especially if you're trading. And so that's one good thing. And the other thing is, we've talked about this before, if you are not right on the sea, but you're a little bit up the river, that is good for you because you are then going to escape the raids that were common by the pirates. Okay, so that was good for Rome as well. Also, Rome is located across 7 steep hills, and we've talked about before that having a high location, right, is easier to defend. So for a lot of reasons, Rome is going to be a popular place. All right, now the founding stories. So there's 2 pretty popular legends, we're going to call them, about who settled Rome. The first one is from the story by Virgil. He was a Roman poet, and he wrote something called the Aeneid. And if you remember, we've talked about the stories before about Troy. So this is supposed to be telling the story about after the Greeks had captured the city of Troy, and this Trojan Aeneas. It's his story about him and his soldiers escaping and going to find a new homeland, and they settle in Italy, supposedly. And he marries a king's daughter, and that's going to unite the Trojans with this group of Latin people that are there. And so that's why he's nicknamed the father of the Romans, because of that, starting this new culture. Now, that's one legend, okay? Another very popular legend is the story of Romulus and Remus, which is quite different. In this one, these twin brothers were left by the Tiber River, and I have a little video I will show you of this. They were supposedly left out in the wild and raised by a wolf. A female wolf found them and raised them for a while until eventually a shepherd and his wife found them. They were like wild boys, and they raised them up. And the long and short of it is that they were wild, and Romulus ends up being killed by Remus. Romulus killed Remus while they were arguing. They were both wanting to build the city, and they were like making fun of each other's building. And excuse me, Remus ends up being killed, and Romulus is like the winner. So that's why the city is named after him, supposedly. Okay, now those are some stories. However, archaeology is what we actually base everything on, right? Historians want facts and evidence. And so really what we know, we don't know a lot like specifically, but we can see evidence that there are probably Neolithic farming villages in this area as early as 5,000 BC, it's going to be a similar story we've talked about other places. We think that maybe that they moved on after they had worn out the soil, farming the same things too much in one place and wearing it out. Then we see that there's a little bit later some permanent settlements up in the hills and the plains around somewhere between 2000 and 1000 BC. And then there's a group called the Latins that settle in central Italy. And these are the people that we eventually think are going to become known as the Romans. We have evidence that they were in the hills around 800 to 700 BC, and that they, settled down, had straw roof huts, tended animals, things like that. Okay, so that's what we think. All right, now, they're not there in Italy by themselves, right? There are other groups there. And so we see both the Greeks and the Etruscans have a very strong influence on the Romans. So first, let's talk about the Greeks. The Greeks settled in southern Italy, and we see their influence. They introduced grape and olive farming to Italy. That we know that the Greek alphabet was spread in Italy because of the Greeks, and a lot of the building styles. They model, the Romans copy some of the building, sculpture, literature, things like that from the Greeks. However, actually, we see a stronger influence from the Etruscans. Okay, the Etruscans settled more in the north of Rome. Eritrea is where they're from. And about like 650-ish, they came in, and eventually they're going to come and move in and control Rome and the area around it. And they became very wealthy from trade, of course, and from mining. And of course, because they're mining, they have copper, iron, lead, and so the artisans become very skilled in making those things into weapons and tools and jewelry and things like that. And tin too, which is a combination, right? And we see that the Romans are going to pick up some of the building styles from the Etruscans. They taught them to use brick and to use tile for their roofs. The Etruscans are the ones who started draining the water from the marshes and laying out their city streets in an organized pattern. They also built temples, and the Romans are going to take some of their ideas on their rituals and building style from them. Also, clothing style, we see direct influence from the Etruscans. For instance, the men having a short cloak and toga is a combination that came from the Etruscans. And the other thing is the army. The Etruscans were very proud of their very strong army, and we know this through a lot of their arts and things that were left behind. And the Romans took that as a model for their own army, which of course we know is going to end up becoming quite strong. Okay, so how did the Romans develop? Well, eventually they're going to grow weary of their Etruscan rulers. So around 509 BC, the Romans overthrow the Etruscan king Tarquin the Proud, and they are going to form a republic. A republic, remember, is a government where citizens elect their own leaders. Okay, and so there, like I said, the Romans are going to also develop a strong army. They're going to eventually go and conquer some of their neighbors and control most of Italy by about 267 BC. One thing, early on, the Romans' army looked very similar to the Greeks, right, with all the really large marching in rows situation. But the Romans actually eventually developed some new strategies of their own, where they decided that having all the rows of soldiers in one single large group was limiting. They could only, attack from one direction. So they wanted to have something that was a little more maneuverable. So they decided to split their army into smaller groups. So they have a legion of about 6,000 soldiers, and that was divided into smaller groups of 60 to 120. And that way, the smaller groups could be ordered to move in different directions. Okay. And the way that that worked is every smaller group had a standard, which is that pole, and at the top there would be some kind of symbol, and it would represent just their group. And so it was a tall pole they could hold up. So in the craziness of battle, they could look to see where, what direction their group was moving in, right? Smart. And real quickly, also the book mentions some of their weaponry. The soldiers usually carried a gladius, which is a short double-edged sword, and a pilum, which is a iron spear. Okay, that was pretty traditional. All right. So why are the Romans able to become really big? We know that they're going to make a huge empire, right? So obviously the big thing is their really strong army, but it's one thing to conquer, but then you have to keep it control, right? Which is what many times we've talked about, how that's the most difficult part. So the reason is because they made some really smart decisions that helped them rule effectively. So for instance, when they did conquer somewhere, they would set up permanent military outposts to protect that area so they wouldn't lose it, right? It would stay in their empire. Also, they would make sure that those outposts were built strategically on a hill or a river crossing, so smart places to put them, which is a good idea. And then the other thing is about how they also built roads that will help them to move supplies quickly, troops quickly, communications, right? All the things we've talked about before. The other thing is about how they treated the people that they conquered. They were very careful to make sure that they treated them well. They thought that if they did that, then they would become loyal subjects, which is kind of what happened. So if many of the conquered people, especially if they were Latin, the Latins got the best treatment. They were often given full Roman citizenship, which is called the Roman Confederation. These groups that were not from Rome, but like kind of the you're like us, and so they can vote and serve in the government even. They did have some other conquered people that they didn't quite give exactly that, but they still treated them like friends or allies, and they treated them well. They could rule themselves and pretty independently, but they had to pay taxes, and they are required to supply soldiers to fight, for Rome. But otherwise they can, manage their own affairs. So basically that treatment kept them, having relative peace. If someone did try to go against Rome, of course they have, strong army, and they are ready to crush any kind of revolt. But otherwise, since they were treated pretty well, they were able to keep a pretty strong and unified republic.